who's gonna win? Who's gonna lose when it comes to range DPS in raids? Because nobody knows shit. We're gonna start ranking everything based off of what we predict will be good. That's also based off of the logs that we've had access to throughout the beta that are 100% not all accessible from the best of the best of the best players, since the best of the best players probably keep their logs private because, you know, race world first and things. So we're gonna do our best to kind of guess what's going to be good. So let's get right into it. I have touched my mouse. Now, Affliction hasn't been doing that swell on the beta, although an M+ seems to be cranking. Its single target seems a little bit lackluster. Plus, it's a good time to mention that pretty much all of the logs that we have had access to are about a month and 2 weeks old, depending on when you see this video. That was the last time we've had raid testing. Raids have been nerfed, but also class tuning has kind of been happening throughout now, so that's also going to take into consideration where specs go. For now, Affliction will go into B tier. It's kind of average. Some of the numbers that you might see on the screen, which is going to happen throughout this video, are a little bit low for Affliction, but that's also because some of the better Warlock players like Kalamazi and, you know, names that personally I know have not been playing Affliction in public logs recently, and we'll get to that in a second. Augmentation is the real question. Well, just to kind of preface this, I'm gonna be putting Augmentation into A tier. So the way I see these tier lists or these rankings, that A and S are probably specs that you want consistently in your raid, with S tier probably specs that you want no matter what, maybe more than one considering their current throughput, which will change. But as it stands, Augmentation is a decent spec. I mean, so far it's been having quite a lot of damage, way more than we've had in Dragonflight, considering that the tuning has put Augmentation in a state where it just does more innate damage, but it buffs people a little bit less, probably to diminish the support role that it can have. As it stands, as you may watch some of the overall damage snippets that we've had from some of the better logs of Augmentation, it's not doing too shabby. It is decent. So it's gonna go into A tier. You're probably gonna want at least one Evoker, and we'll see which one it is, but I have a feeling like the first one is probably going to be Augmentation at this rate. Next on the list is Balanced Druid. Oh boy, so if it wasn't for Nagura, I would have ranked Balanced Druid all the way into the shit tier, because every other balance log that I've been able to find was probably pretty poop. Now, I'm not 100% sure what happened in the log that you're looking at right now with Nagura, where she's just destroying it. If she was just fed buffs or anything like that, or maybe it was just a weird situation with Balance at the time. But Balance is not doing too shabby, and that's it with it being in B tier. Now, Nagura is one of the best Balanced Druids in the world, which is why I'm giving Balance the benefit of a doubt. Otherwise, I would have just dropped it down to the bottom of the barrel, because historically, Balance hasn't been great in raids since Shadowlands, since Revendreth, 10,000 haste, spam your spells like a maniac type playstyle. Yeah, since then. So now that's where it's gonna go, and it will remain there for the foreseeable future. And with Arcane next on the list, we can start with the disclaimers. Cause I don't know how this will survive, but Arcane is going into the S tier because it has to. Now, do I believe it will remain S tier? I don't think so, but Arcane is doing tremendously in single target. You're probably looking at some of the damage breakdowns that we've been able to gather, some of the more, let's say, reasonable breakdowns, because some of the unreasonable ones I did not want to put in this video, because holy shit, it would have nerfed Arcane into the ground. Arcane is doing significant single target damage. It's probably the best single target damage spec in the game, which is definitely not going to last. They're definitely going to nerf it. Now, I don't know how the nerf is going to happen. I don't know how big the nerf will be. Hopefully not too big, but the profile is just really good, and it's looking like the strongest mage spec at the moment. Even if it's nerfed, if it's, you know, a reasonable nerf, it's probably still going to be S tier, considering that the other mage specs are a little bit further behind in pure raid performance. From what we've seen, okay. Beastmaster Hunter is the other S tier, because no matter how much I looked at consistently high-performing Beastmaster Hunters, they're freaking destroying the meters, okay? We've done some graphs and some tunings. You'll probably see it closer to the end with the average damage of everybody. Beastmaster is kind of reigning at the top just because I've deliberately omitted putting the degenerate Arcane Mage logs there. But Beastmaster is just really strong in single target. I believe it has to do with the Basilisk Scholar talent that just buffs its single targets tremendously. And I don't think that's necessarily going to go away, because outside of that, Beastmaster is just a terrible spec in terms of tuning, and we haven't seen any buffs yet. It's kind of hanging on a thread on that particular damage style that it has going for it. And if it is going to be tuned, we're probably going to see that being nerfed and overall the damage being increased, but it's so unlikely at this point, considering people are prepping for Race the World first. So nerfing or changing like drastically how these specs will perform is very unlikely until the race will end. And historically, Beast Mastery has always had really good single target damage, and it hasn't necessarily been nerfed. It's one of the most popular specs. Blizzard is more likely to leave it overperforming rather than underperforming. So that's why I suspect that it's going to stay in S tier for the foreseeable future. Demonology is currently, spoiler alert, the best Warlock spec in terms of the overall performance that we've been able to see. And you might see some damage breakdowns for some of the Demonologies here. You might, I think we might have the Kalamazi log as well that I mentioned before. And overall, from what we've seen in the raid testing, Demonology is currently reigning supreme, because some of the other logs with Destruction, where it was just degenerately spamming Rain of Fire and single target, are not going to be included in this research. But it's just okay. And even with that, the reason I'm putting it this high isn't because of its damage, because its damage is fairly lower than the other specs here, but mostly because you will want a Warlock spec, because you do definitely want Gates, you definitely want Hellstones. Soulstones is like whatever, everybody seems to have a battle res nowadays. But Demonology seems to be, in this case, the best Warlock spec to bring those tools that every raid team will want, so you'll definitely see at least one, and it's likely that that's going to be Demonology at this point. So not Destruction. Surprisingly, Destruction has been underperforming considering the amount of Chaos Bolt buffs, but there could be a chance that all of the Chaos Bolt buffs that happened for Destruction, because I cannot remember the dates for everything, might have happened after the raid testing, which could put Destruction all the way into B tier, potentially rivaling Demonology, although I'm not yet convinced. Until then, if Demonology is going to be the best, it's likely that Destro is going to be way down for now. But Destro is usually the spec that is least encumbered by raid mechanics, considering that Madness of the Azure is no longer a thing anymore, if I recall. Back in the day when I used to main Destruction Warlock and we had to sit still for 6 seconds straight. That's no longer the case. Other than that, nothing that I can say about Destruction that I haven't said about Demonology. It's just a matter of tuning at this point. In cleave fights, usually Destruction is superior, of course, superior. So I wouldn't be surprised if top Demonology Warlocks would swap to Destro for those types of fights, since most of the logs have been from the earlier bosses of Mythic and a bunch of Heroic, but usually Heroic bosses are not that relevant, since everybody's just hiding their logs. It could be that Destro could go up at least 1 tier. Fire Mage, my main. And you think, hey, B tier is not that bad. Well, B tier is probably because it's just a mage spec. And honestly, with all of the nerfs, its single target is kind of like its only redeeming factor. But as much as you strain your butt cheeks to do a lot of single target damage, the most you'll be able to do is around Balanced Druid. Maybe even less than Balanced Druid. It's just that Fire Mage is just a really good spec in general in terms of its damage profile, how many combusts you have access to. Ideally, in a world where both your talents could be balanced equally, we could see Fire be a really good raid spec, since the talents actually give it access to a lot of damage profiles, damage types that it has. Not with Living Bomb, unfortunately, so we'll see how that plays out, because that is just not a talent anymore. But if Fire Mage gets the buff that it needs, not even to like rival BM Hunter or Elemental Shaman or anything like that, but just to have like decent damage, it could be A tier or even S tier just because of that. We'll see how it is. Frost Mage is the other really strong mage spec that could give Arcane a run for its money. There are some really good Frost Mage logs out there. And if Arcane is going to get nerfed into the ground, which I think everybody hopes not, because we don't like those nerfs, okay? Stop crying for Mage in your chat. Frost could probably take up the torch and become the mage spec in the raid, which I hope not, because I don't want to raid on Frost Mage. I want to raid on any other mage spec except Frost. But listen, whatever the wind blows, okay? Other than that, Frost Mage is just particularly good in terms of overall performance. Glacial Spike has been buffed going into the War Within, and if we're gonna likely maybe go Mastery Focus, we might see Glacial Spike hitting really hard. Although there are the Icelands builds where you just spam Icelands until, you know, the raid timer stops and you have to go to bed. And that's probably where we're going to be seeing Frost Mage. I don't see anything else outside of tuning, pushing Frost above the other two mage specs. Marksmanship has been a hard spec to rank because in Mythic Plus and during our testing it's been doing pretty well. In raids, not a lot of people play Marksmanship, which is weird because it feels like the best hunter spec in the gameplay aspect, of course. But when it comes to raid testing, everybody just wants to taste the best damage possible. And that's probably survival at this point, or BM, of course. But marksmanship is around B tier based on its performance. It can have some probably really good fights with pure AoE in some of the raid bosses, since Beast Mastery is terrible at doing AoE damage, so I wouldn't knock it out of the park just yet. But so far from what we've seen, it doesn't seem like it's turning any heads anytime soon, and with the hero talents being what they are, you're probably only still going to be playing Sentinel, and with Dark Ranger potentially being the single target-ish, more focused hero talent, which is still underperforming even at this point, even after like multiple buffs to Black Arrow. It's a sad time to be marksmanship. Devastation is something that people rank fairly low, and okay, I'm probably just a little bit silly because I feel like Devastation has quite a bit of damage from what we've seen and from what we've tested. Now, I don't know if it's going to be a must pick, I don't know if it's even going to trump Augmentation, but it does have potential to do really high intense burst damage. Obviously, in the top guilds, if, let's say, the damage profile is similar to Augmentation, the top guilds are probably going to take Augmentation because it has more value, adds more value to the raid team than Devastation. If you're just, you know, your average Mythic Raider, Heroic Raider, even normal Raider, you're probably fine with Devastation, all things considered. It's a fairly simple spec. It does crazy burst, it has good damage. It does have the lower range that you have to, you know, keep in mind. But other than that, it's around A tier. I mean, the damage is just really good. And then I kind of have to put it there. I mean, it's just way better than Fire Mage and Affliction and stuff like that. So there has to be like a tier separation there. Elemental is also in a similar boat with Arcane in the sense that we don't know where the tuning is going to land this spec. Currently, it's doing Gigapog wow damage, which is great. Oh my god, when was the last time when we've seen Elemental actually destroy? I think it might have been in Battle for Azeroth, Battle for the Zaralor, Crucible of Storms, Spread Cleave situations, essentially with, you know, Lava Burst, the funnel and stuff like that, if I recall. So I would be very happy to see Elemental at the forefront of the meta. Now, it doesn't have as much damage as these other two, maybe I'll put it a little bit behind, but it is a very strong Shaman spec. It competes with Enhancement, and from what I understand, Enhancement has maybe a little bit more single target damage than Elemental, which, fair. This is a range DPS tier list, so if we're gonna rank Elemental in relation to the other ones, this is how I predict it to be. Now, it's not in danger of being nerfed the way that, let's say, Arcane and maybe Beast Masteries are in terms of single target damage, so it's probably the safest S tier spec out there. And it's doing really well, especially after the rework. I seriously doubt the devs are going to hard nerf Elemental at any point if they want to tune the specs. If anything, maybe buff the other ones. Of course, that's what we always, all the time want. And it's happy time for Elemental. What more can I say? Shadow, I'm going to do another hot take on Shadow. I think it's shit. Well, it's not shit in terms of its damage output. It does a lot of damage and it does have potential, but I feel like its single target is a little bit lackluster. And from the raid testing that we've seen so far, it's not doing too hot. Now, once again, it could be that some of the better Shadow Priests out there did not make their logs public, so it might be way better than it is. It could be a decent B tier spec. Now, the reason why I'm hesitant of putting it into B tier is because the damage is still lower than a bunch of the B tier specs, and the unique utility that Shadow Priest would bring will probably be brought by one of the healing specs, you know, Fortitude and all of that. And Shadow Priest has historically been a pretty bad raid spec unless it was just overtuned. Remember Razageth, when Shadow Priest had to be like carried all over the place by evokers, and that probably happened on a bunch of other fights. Except for that, it doesn't feel like Shadow Priest has regained its mobility. So in terms of, you know, getting into the raid, into the season 1, especially at the beginning when everybody's a little bit squishy, Shadow Priests are not going to have a good time. They don't have new mobility. Well, you can cast Void Torrent while moving with Void Weaver, and that's a big plus. But we don't know if Void Weaver is going to be the de facto hero talent tree. It could very well just be Archon, and that even adds an extra cast in Halo. So I don't know anymore, but Mind Flay Insanity is the shit. Now, once again, these are all predictions. Class tuning, spec tuning in this case, will definitely change it. And just to put your mind at ease, you can watch this right here, right now, where I have looked at the top or the latest, let's say 100 to 100 logs of raids and try to get like the best performing fights for all of the specs and kind of do an average. And you can see that there's quite a bit of difference. This is not okay. This is not going to last. Usually the specs are tuned way closer to each other. So it's either that we are lacking information that's not much we can do about, or that the balance is still a little bit and is going to be fixed coming in closer. Because if you look at this particular distribution from Amir Drasil in 10.2.5, the specs at a 95 percentile are a lot closer to each other, and this is something that you can expect. So where specs like Beast Mastery and maybe Arcane are just like breaking the meters all over the place, it's likely that's not going to last. So don't fret too much. But what's fun is to see how this evolves over the course of the season and how wrong we are. Because if we're right, I mean, that doesn't make this video as fun as it could be. Like our tank prediction tier list from last week for Mythic Plus, because you have to do some dungeons every now and again, and considering the tank shortage of 2024, it's probably a good idea to, you know, get a heads up on some of the tank meta that you can get your hands into to, you know, fill up those group slots right here. Check it out, check it out.